Cumberland Gap, Kentucky, 1884. While every settler in the valley scrambled to stack stones and raise a proper fireplace before winter's first breath, one man worked against both time and tradition. Scottish immigrant Duncan MacLeod was still arranging stones in late October, slowly, deliberately, long after others were already curing mortar by the fire. Neighbors muttered that it was structural madness. Some called him a fool outright. MacLeod was building something no frontier carpenter had seen, a fireplace set exactly 45 degrees across a cabin corner, angled like a defiant wedge of stone cutting through empty space. The design seemed wasteful, absurd, frontier heresy. He used 40% more stone than any sensible man would, carrying the thermal mass a full 18 inches into both adjoining walls. Samuel Wright, the settlement's most seasoned builder, watched in disbelief. "A fireplace belongs flush against the wall," he scoffed. "Not dangling out in the open like a mistake you ain't finished yet." Tom Bradley, the region's pride of masonry, dismissed MacLeod's work as Highland nonsense that won't stand a Kentucky winter. Then came January 12, 1885, the winter people would speak of for the rest of their lives. Temperatures plunged to 18 below zero and stayed there 23 straight days. It was a killing cold, the kind that stole breath, split timbers, and claimed 31 lives across 3 counties. Standard fireplaces failed one after another. Families burned their chairs, their tables, anything to survive. Wright's household nearly froze, consuming 3 cords of wood in 10 days. But MacLeod's strange, diagonal hearth? His cabin held 68 degrees, steady and even. He burned half the wood his neighbors used. The massive stone stayed warm 12 hours after the fire died, radiating heat through both walls like a heartbeat in the night. What ancient Highland wisdom had this quiet stonemason carried across the ocean? Knowledge of heat, mass, and corner geometry, that every frontier expert had overlooked? If you enjoy forgotten lessons of practical genius, stick around. There are more documented accounts worth remembering. Duncan MacLeod knelt in the October mud, his measuring cord pulled tight between 2 rough-hewn log walls meeting at a perfect right angle. The hemp line stretched diagonally across the corner, a place no sensible man would think to build. Behind him, Wright's hammer fell silent. He had been splitting shingles for his own roof, but curiosity got the better of him. "Duncan, that's the damnedest thing I've seen," he called out, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "Fireplace goes on the wall or in the corner proper, not hanging out in space like some half-built mistake." MacLeod didn't look up. His scarred hands shaped by 15 years of Highland stonework, adjusted the cord until it struck the exact 45-degree line he wanted. "In Sutherland," he said in his thick Scots brogue, "we build for heat, not for looks. Stone holds the fire's warmth long after the flame dies. A corner lets 2 walls hold that heat, not just one." Wright shook his head and went back to his shingles. Across the clearing, Klaus Weber paused from laying his own foundation stones. He'd heard the exchange and couldn't help wondering if MacLeod's idea echoed the old Bavarian stoves his grandfather once described. But Weber kept quiet. Out here, on the American frontier, survival meant following what had already proven itself, not dabbling in foreign geometry that might get a family killed come winter. By the end of October, MacLeod's odd construction had drawn the attention of Tom Bradley himself, the county's veteran mason, respected for every chimney he'd raised since 1878. Bradley arrived carrying his level and square like badges of authority. The moment he saw MacLeod's angled hearth, his face tightened into a scowl of professional disapproval. The Scotsman had carved out a foundation that pushed 18 full inches into each adjoining wall, creating a hulking stone platform that seemed to swallow the cabin's interior. Even more baffling, the firebox would sit at a 22.5-degree angle toward the room's center, an orientation Tom Bradley had never encountered in 6 years of building hearths across 3 counties. But what unsettled him most was the sheer mass of stone MacLeod intended to haul into the structure, over 4,000 pounds of native sandstone, a choice that would cost nearly 40% more than any sensible frontier settler would dare spend. "That man's wasting good stone, nearly half again what's needed, and putting his firebox where it can't heat worth a damn," Bradley told Wright and Weber that evening at the settlement's informal gathering. "Highland methods don't work in Kentucky winters. I've built 63 fireplaces in this region, and every single one sits proper against the wall where it belongs. But MacLeod worked on, unshaken by the community's doubts. Each morning, he and his 16-year-old son James walked to the creek bed, selecting sandstone pieces that would hold heat long after limestone had gone cold. Highland builders demanded specific stone qualities: density, grain structure, thermal retention, traits James was learning to judge with nothing more than his fingertips and the weight in his palms. Where neighbors built their fireplaces in 3 hurried days, MacLeod spent 2 full weeks angling, trimming, and setting each stone with surgical precision. The geometry had to be perfect. The system depended on it. Why do we build it this way?" James asked as they fitted the angled walls of the firebox. Born in Kentucky but raised on Highland knowledge, the boy was fluent in both frontier skepticism and centuries-old Scottish thermal craft. MacLeod tapped the corner's massive stonework. "See how the fire sits? When the flame burns, it sends heat into both wall masses at once. A standard fireplace warms one wall poorly and shoots the rest up the chimney. Our way stores the heat in 4,000 pounds of stone, and gives it back slow, all through the night." He demonstrated with his hands, showing how radiant heat would bounce from the angled firebox into the room while the adjoining stone walls soaked up warmth like a pair of giant batteries. As November crept in, criticism in the settlement grew sharper. Wright calculated that MacLeod's meticulous stonework had cost him 3 weeks of precious time, weeks that could have been spent splitting wood or winterizing the cabin. Weber wondered if the strange angle might cause dangerous draft issues, filling the cabin with smoke. Bradley declared it a waste of good stone that'll prove useless when the real cold sets in. But the mathematics behind MacLeod's design told a different story. His firebox opening measured 36 inches wide by 24 inches tall, angled to reflect 73% of the fire's radiant heat into the living space, compared to the 45% reflection rate of wall-mounted hearths. The thermal mass pushed precisely 18 inches into both walls, enough to store the equivalent of 2.5 hours of active burning. His chimney pulled a cleaner draft too, about 15% more efficient thanks to the corner's natural airflow advantage. On November 15, 1884, MacLeod set the final stone. Snowflakes drifted in that evening, the first sign of the long test ahead. Samuel Wright stopped by to inspect the finished work, running his calloused hand across the angled stone that seemed to belong neither to wall nor corner, but somehow to both. "We'll see how Duncan's sideways contraption works when the real cold hits," Wright muttered to Klaus Weber as they walked home. Neither man could imagine that within 2 months, MacLeod's strange fireplace would draw the line between survival and death for half the families in Cumberland Gap. December arrived with unforgiving clarity. The settlement's heating systems were about to reveal their truths. Wright's standard fireplace, built on 12 years of frontier wisdom, devoured wood at a merciless pace. To keep his cabin above freezing on the coldest nights, he needed to feed the fire constantly. By mid-December he had burned through 6 cords of oak and hickory, watching his winter supply shrink faster than he dared admit. 3 cabins south, Duncan MacLeod's angled hearth performed with a quiet, mechanical certainty that defied the region's established logic. Each evening, he fed the fire with the same 2 armloads of hardwood his neighbors considered barely enough to warm hands for an hour. But where standard fireplaces bled their heat into the night sky, MacLeod's corner-anchor design behaved like a thermal engine, capturing, storing, and returning warmth with Highland efficiency. The physics revealed themselves on the coldest mornings of December. Klaus Weber noticed it first. At dawn, with the temperature sunk to 8 below zero, he walked past MacLeod's cabin and stopped mid-stride. Every other home in the settlement wore a thick crust of ice inside the windows, frozen breath, frozen condensation, frozen warning. But MacLeod's panes were clear as spring glass, untouched by frost. It meant only one thing: the interior had never fallen cold enough for condensation to freeze. Weber mentioned it to Tom Bradley, who brushed it off as frontier coincidence, until a 4-day cold snap forced him to see it with his own eyes. MacLeod's heating system was operating on principles his Highland ancestors had refined over 3 centuries of famine wood supplies and weapon-grade winters. During the evening burn, the angled firebox fired radiant heat deep into both corner wall masses, charging the 4,000-pound sandstone structure like a thermal reservoir. The stone absorbed heat slowly, steadily, methodically, and then released it all night long, keeping the cabin comfortable 8 to 12 hours after the last flame died to embers. By Christmas, the numbers spoke louder than the doubts. MacLeod had burned 4 cords of firewood, and his family worked in shirt sleeves even during the worst cold. Samuel Wright had burned 8, and still his cabin barely touched 45 degrees on the harshest nights. His family slept in layers, huddled under blankets, sharing body heat like trapped livestock. Weber fell between them at 6.5 cords, but his home suffered the inevitable flaw of every wall-mounted fireplace: blistering heat near the hearth, freezing air in the corners, and an invisible battle between fire and frost that never found equilibrium. Curiosity spread through the settlement like smoke. Each evening, MacLeod taught James the art of thermal reading, how to press a bare palm against the cornerstones and judge how deeply the heat had soaked in. 8 hours after banking the coals, the stones still hummed with warmth. Standard fireplaces, built with minimal mass against a single wall, were cold within 3 hours. Families with those systems had no choice: burn through the night, or accept indoor temperatures that dipped below freezing. Even Tom Bradley, long the region's masonry authority, found himself studying the Highland hearth with reluctant respect. His training told him the angle should ruin the draft, but the evidence in front of him said otherwise. During a visit to discuss spring construction, Bradley watched the corner chimney pull air with unusual steadiness, feeding the fire cleanly and producing less smoke than any of his own wall-bound builds. "I'll grant the design has merit," Bradley admitted to Wright during their weekly settlement meeting. "But it's too complicated for frontier building. Too much stone, too much time, too much measuring. Most families can't spare the materials." But professional pride could no longer hide what performance made painfully clear. Wright quietly began asking MacLeod about thermal mass calculations, heat-soak timing, and radiant reflection principles. Practical to his bones, he recognized the undeniable advantages: less wood burned, steadier warmth, no need for midnight fuelings. Yet he also knew the economic sting. His family had prepared 12 cords of wood based on standard consumption. MacLeod's efficiency meant Wright had overshot by almost half, pouring weeks of labor into timber that could have been better spent elsewhere. The implications gnawed at him. If MacLeod's Highland methods outperformed established American practice, then what other, primitive, techniques had frontier builders dismissed by mistake? For 12 years, Wright had trusted that American innovation naturally surpassed Old World tradition. Now he wasn't so sure. Perhaps the old systems weren't backward. They were battle-tested in ways frontier shortcuts had never been. Klaus Weber felt this same unsettling shift. His grandfather had once described European heating structures: massive stone stoves, angled hearths, strategic placement, but Weber had dismissed them as relics of a land where wood was scarce and winters were cruel. America had timber to spare, so efficiency had never been a priority. But MacLeod's results forced him to reconsider. The Scotsman was achieving heating performance Weber's modern, hybrid methods couldn't match. Complexity wasn't waste here, it was engineering. Old-timer Jonathan Morse, survivor of the devastating winter of 1856, the one that killed 12 across the region, came to study the Highland hearth in late December. He knew the signs of a deadly season approaching, and MacLeod's cabin looked like the only one in the settlement built for what was coming. "Weather's got that feel," Morse warned as he studied the angled hearth, running stiff fingers along the warm stone. "Same kind of pressure, same wind, same quiet we had before the killing cold of 56. If we get another winter like that one, this thing you've built may be the difference between living and dying, for more folks than just your own." January 12, 1885 arrived with that terrible silence old frontiersmen recognized instantly. The world felt hollow, as if sound itself had frozen. Samuel Wright checked his mercury thermometer twice, hoping for error. It read 18 below zero at dawn. By noon, under a sky of brilliant blue, it dropped another 4 degrees. Something ancient and arctic had settled over Kentucky, and it would not lift for 23 consecutive days. Jonathan Morse had been right. Devastatingly right. The failures began by the third morning. Wright's heating system was buckling under the relentless cold. His wall-mounted fireplace created a blistering zone within 3 feet of the hearth, while water froze solid in the cabin's far corners. He burned 3 cords of oak in 10 days, realizing with creeping terror that his winter supply would vanish long before February. The single-wall thermal mass bled its heat within hours. Wright was forced to maintain a fire 20 hours a day, fighting to keep the interior above 20 degrees. Across the clearing, Klaus Weber faced a different catastrophe. His hybrid German-American design, built with limestone thermal mass, began to crack, sharp, splintering fractures from the violent cycles of heating and cooling. Efficiency dropped by at least 30% overnight. Maria Weber, 6 months pregnant, showed early signs of frostbite despite sitting within 6 feet of the flames. Their cabin hovered at 32 degrees during the worst nights. They slept fully clothed, under every blanket they owned, huddled together simply to survive. But the most dramatic failure belonged to Tom Bradley. The pride of regional masonry watched helplessly as his chimney stones split apart under extreme temperature differentials. The moment gaps formed, Arctic air poured through the cracks like a tidal flood. Bradley fought it for 2 days, setting emergency clay mortar that froze before he could press it into place. On January 18th, his family abandoned the cabin entirely, seeking refuge with neighbors whose fireplaces hadn't yet surrendered. MacLeod's hearth held steady through it all. The Highland fireplace performed with eerie, mechanical consistency. MacLeod's cabin never dropped below 58 degrees, even on nights when the outside temperature hit -22. The angled firebox kept reflecting its 73% radiant efficiency into both wall masses, feeding 4,000 pounds of sandstone that returned the heat in long, slow pulses, 12 to 14 hours after every evening fire. The MacLeod family cooked, worked, and slept in normal clothing. While neighbors fought frostbite, they brewed tea and told stories by steady warmth. The data became impossible to argue with. Over the entire 23-day freeze, MacLeod burned 1.5 cords of wood, a fraction of the 4 to 6 cords consumed by every other family. And unlike the others, he maintained even warmth throughout the entire cabin. No cold corners. No freezing drafts. No danger zones. The very walls radiated heat, warm to the touch at all hours. Wright's family, by contrast, sat in a tight circle around their failing hearth, less than 3 feet from the flames or risk freezing. The physics of survival. The secret lay in Highland physics honed through centuries of necessity. The angled placement created natural convection loops that circulated warm air throughout the room. Thermal mass on 2 walls captured energy instead of losing it up the chimney. 4,000 pounds of sandstone acted as a slow-release battery, delivering warmth through long, fireless nights. Standard fireplaces lost 60 to 70% of heat immediately, radiated out, or sucked skyward. MacLeod's system saved heat. Standard systems hemorrhaged it. Crisis reaches the settlement by January 25th. Desperation swept through the settlement. Several families were at the brink of fuel exhaustion, their wood piles reduced to scraps and frozen limbs. The temperature outside remained murderous. Inside many cabins, it wasn't much better. And the killing cold still showed no sign of lifting. Samuel Wright did the math with numb fingers and a sinking stomach. At the rate his family was burning through wood, their remaining supply would last 6 days, 7 at best. After that, they would be feeding the fire with furniture, tools, even structural timbers just to keep the room above freezing. Across the clearing, Klaus Weber fought a losing battle of his own. His cracked limestone hearth needed constant tending to keep smoke from choking the cabin, and every morning brought new signs of cold-related illness in his shivering family. 2 elderly settlers, the Hendersons, were faring even worse. Frostbite had taken hold of their toes and fingertips, deep enough that amputation loomed if temperatures didn't rise soon. The contrast between survival and collapse grew brutally clear. MacLeod's cabin stood with clear windows, steady smoke curling from a clean burning stack, an improbable pocket of order in a landscape of crisis. But around him, the settlement looked like a field hospital after a battle, frost-glazed windows, spasms of dark smoke from desperate fuels, and families fighting minute by minute to keep death from crossing their thresholds. Inside the Scotsman's home, James MacLeod kept a careful ledger of temperatures, scribbling notes in the margin just as his father had taught him. Night after night, the readings remained astonishingly consistent, 62 to 68 degrees. Neighbors reported numbers closer to 28 to 35, the kind of cold that stiffened boots and froze water in the pail. Suddenly, Everyone wanted to understand the physics that had become their potential salvation. MacLeod walked right through the principles, his voice calm despite the crisis clawing at the door. The angled firebox created a superior draft, pulling air through the flames with mechanical precision and extracting every bit of heat energy from the wood. The corner position sent radiant energy into two wall masses at once, storing heat standard fireplaces could never capture. But the true miracle lay in the stone itself, 4,000 pounds of slow-breathing sandstone that released warmth like a great beast sleeping through the night. Where Wright's hearth demanded constant feeding, MacLeod's burned efficiently and rested efficiently, maintaining comfort long after the last flames had died. By the end of the 23-day freeze, 3 families had abandoned their cabins entirely. Their heating systems had shattered under the relentless cold. Meanwhile, MacLeod's Highland hearth marched on with unwavering reliability. The man the settlement once mocked was now its only hope. The walk of humility on January 26th, Wright swallowed 12 years of frontier pride and approached MacLeod's door. His breath crystallized in the -15-degree air, the sound of his boots brittle on the snow. Behind him trudged Sarah and their 3 children, wrapped in blankets and carrying what little food they had left. "Duncan," Wright called, his voice tight with humiliation and fear. "We need shelter. Our fireplace failed. We're freezing." MacLeod opened the door, and warm air rolled out in a wave so strong the Wright's clothing began to steam. The shock hit Wright like a hammer. His own cabin had fallen to 22 degrees despite burning furniture. MacLeod's modest 16 by 20-foot home felt like late April. "Come in, all of you," MacLeod said simply, though the flicker of calculation in his eyes revealed the truth. 4 people lived here. Now 9 would need space, food, and warmth. 3 hours later, the Webbers arrived. Klaus carried Maria, pregnant, trembling, and dangerously pale, while his 2 young children clung to his coat. Their fireplace had failed completely, the stone cracked wide enough to let the winter wind scream through. Frostbite had begun forming on Maria's fingers, and Klaus feared what another night might bring. MacLeod took them in without hesitation. 14 souls now sheltered in the Scotsman's cabin. And still the Highland hearth held fast. 62 to 68 degrees, even with bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder inside. Wright, despite the gravity of the moment, found himself transfixed. How could one fireplace outperform every system in the settlement? MacLeod seized the moment to teach, because knowledge, he believed, was the one thing this winter could not steal. He held up a dried reed over the flames. It bent and dipped as invisible currents swirled around it. "Watch the air," MacLeod said. "Corner pulls cold down from the ceiling, pushes warm up from the floor. Standard fireplace heats one spot, leaves dead air everywhere else." He guided Wright's hand across the stone wall. 8 hours after banking the coals, the sandstone remained warm 12 feet from the firebox. Wright had never witnessed anything like it. 4,000 pounds of stone holds heat," MacLeod said softly. "The way a mountain holds snow. Takes it slow, gives it back slower." Wright nodded, humbled and shaken. He finally understood. This Scotsman wasn't eccentric. He was centuries ahead. "Your fireplace heats fast and loses fast because the stone mass is too small and sitting in the wrong place." Wright heard the words as a rebuke, but they held the weight of mathematical truth. The longer he observed MacLeod's system, the clearer the precision became. While Wright's wall-mounted hearth blasted heat in wasteful bursts, MacLeod's angled firebox swept radiant energy into both corner walls, charging them like twin batteries. Heat that would have fled uselessly up the chimney in a standard design was captured and stored. The corner draft effect impressed Wright most of all. MacLeod's fireplace pulled air through the burn chamber with 15% greater efficiency, feeding the flames with a clean, hungry oxygen flow that devoured wood completely. Nothing smoldered. Nothing wasted. Every stick of fuel surrendered its full measure of heat. And the result? A cabin without cold zones, without death lurking in the corners. The mason who had built 63 fireplaces, Tom Bradley, arrived on January 29th, shoulders bent beneath a load heavier than frost. His professional pride had collapsed along with his chimney stones. The region's most respected mason had abandoned his own cabin in choking smoke and crippling cold, his craftsmanship reduced to a hazard. He stepped into MacLeod's warm interior, and examined the intact stonework with the stunned reverence of a master confronted with something better than his own work. "I built 63 fireplaces in this region," Bradley murmured, running a hand along the angled wall. "And I never understood thermal mass like this. How do you know to run the stone 18 inches into both walls?" MacLeod's answer stretched back 3 centuries. His father had taught him the old Highland ways, the science of survival carved into stone through generations of brutal winters and precious little fuel. Sandstone, for example, retained heat 40% longer than the limestone favored by American builders. Mortar wasn't just mud, the clay-to-sand ratios had to flex with temperature changes to keep the structure from cracking in the cold. And the angle of the firebox wasn't improvisation, it came from mathematical calculations for optimal heat reflection, refined over hundreds of years. "In Sutherland," MacLeod told Bradley quietly, "we built for survival, not speed. Every stone had to earn its place, or a family froze." The knowledge they once mocked the crisis turned MacLeod's cabin into a classroom for desperate men. Wright sketched the angled design like a man trying to rewrite his own past, calculating stone weights, wall depths, and draft angles. Weber learned to read stones by weight and density, understanding at last why his limestone mass had failed catastrophically under thermal stress. Bradley realized his 6 years of regional masonry had taught him how to make fireplaces beautiful, but not how to make them endure. All the while, MacLeod's system kept 14 refugees alive inside a 480-square-foot cabin. Despite the body heat, moisture, and crowded air, the Highland draft design managed ventilation with effortless stability. No smoke buildup. No fuel spikes. No suffocation risk. By crisis's end, MacLeod had burned 2.2 cords of wood, less than Wright's family alone used in their freezing home during the first 10 days. Numbers didn't lie. Highland engineering had outperformed every frontier practice by a margin measured not in degrees, but in lives. Proof of survival on February 2nd, Maria Weber delivered a healthy son inside MacLeod's warm cabin. Her own home still stood empty and uninhabitable, a monument to flawed design. The infant's birth marked more than a victory over the cold. It was living proof that thermal engineering, true engineering, had made survival possible. Wright later calculated that MacLeod's fireplace had saved at least 4 lives, likely more had the cold stretch lasted beyond 23 days. When February's thaw finally touched the Cumberland Gap, it brought uncomfortable clarity. Wright's 12 years of frontier experience hadn't simply been incomplete, they had been catastrophically wrong. What he once dismissed as foreign eccentricity was, in fact, superior engineering in its purest form. A march of humility and rebuilding. By early March, temperatures crept high enough for rebuilding to begin. On March 8th, Wright dismantled his broken hearthstone by hand, keeping what could be salvaged and discarding the treacherous limestone that had betrayed him in the cold. He rebuilt according to MacLeod's exacting specifications. Firebox angled 45 degrees into the room, thermal mass extending 18 inches into both adjacent walls, over 3,000 pounds of sandstone, selected for density and heat retention, mortar mixed to flex, not crack. Klaus Weber contracted MacLeod to build fireplaces for the Patterson and O'Brien families. Settlers who had seen the Highland system in action and refused to gamble another winter on standard American designs. Weber rebuilt his own hearth using Highland principles, blending them with German framing techniques to create a hybrid that respected both traditions. For the first time, MacLeod earned real income from knowledge once dismissed as unnecessary. And no transformation was more dramatic than Bradley's. At the settlement's March gathering, the once proud mason stood before his neighbors and spoke plainly. "I thought I knew stone and heat," Bradley said. "But this Highland mason showed me I'd been building pretty fireplaces that couldn't heat worth a damn. Every fireplace I build from now on follows Duncan's angle and thermal mass design." Tom Bradley's endorsement carried weight far beyond Cumberland Gap. As the region's most respected mason, his declaration influenced dozens of construction projects across 3 counties. Highland techniques, once dismissed as eccentric, now spread rapidly through Scottish immigrant networks across the Appalachian settlements of Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina. MacLeod's cousin Robert, settled near Asheville, received detailed drawings and specifications via spring correspondence, marking the beginning of what would become the Highland fireplace migration, a movement of survival-focused engineering traveling through mountain communities where fuel efficiency meant life itself. By late 1885, 17 cabins within 50 miles of Cumberland Gap incorporated MacLeod's angled corner design. Requests poured in from settlements MacLeod had never visited. Recognition from the Settlement Council arrived in April. Local officials formally appointed him to oversee all future fireplace construction in the region, acknowledging that his Highland methods had prevented multiple deaths during the January crisis. The role carried both authority and responsibility. MacLeod inspected and approved each new fireplace, ensuring no family would face another winter with inadequate heating. His first official project involved redesigning the settlement's planned community building, replacing the architect's standard central fireplace with 2 angled corner units capable of efficiently heating the larger space. By summer 1886, the economic impact was clear. Wood dealers reported a 35% drop in firewood sales, representing thousands of cords no longer needed for winter survival. Reduced fuel demand lowered regional wood prices and freed timber for construction projects previously delayed by heating requirements. Highland thermal efficiency translated into real economic relief for settlers living on subsistence budgets, allowing investments in livestock, land improvements, and agricultural expansion rather than frantic wood collection. MacLeod's meticulous documentation, a tradition passed down through Highland knowledge, proved invaluable. His son James maintained detailed records of fireplace specifications, thermal performance, and fuel consumption. The archive included stone selection criteria, mortar ratios adapted to Kentucky clay, and seasonal performance comparisons showing consistent superiority over standard frontier designs. Measurable results impressed even skeptical builders from distant settlements. MacLeod's original fireplace, now in its second year, continued to outperform every standard design, interior temperatures 18 to 22 degrees higher while consuming 40% less firewood. The winter of 1886 to 87 offered further proof. Temperatures dropped to -12 degrees, yet MacLeod's cabins remained comfortable, while conventional fireplaces struggled to maintain life-sustaining heat. Regional building costs fell $15 to $30 per cabin, as Highland efficiency eliminated the need for excessive firewood preparation and emergency modifications. Families could redirect resources toward farming, livestock, and home improvements instead of winter survival alone. Modern science would later validate MacLeod's intuition. In 1976, the Appalachian Heritage Foundation reconstructed Highland fireplaces using MacLeod's original specifications. Laboratory testing confirmed 2.8 times greater heating efficiency, temperature advantages of 18 to 22 degrees, and heat retention equivalent to 8 to 12 hours of active burning. Highland engineering principles had proven themselves under controlled, modern scientific scrutiny. Archaeological evidence at MacLeod's original Cumberland Gap site preserves these techniques for posterity. The Kentucky Historical Society maintains the cabin and fireplace, where visitors can see mason marks etched into sandstone, thermal mass extending 18 inches into corner walls, and firebox angles executed with precise mathematical reasoning. The site stands as one of the few intact examples of Highland thermal engineering applied to American frontier architecture. Even modern passive solar and earth-sheltered homes echo MacLeod's methods, employing thermal mass and angled heat sources to maximize storage while minimizing fuel consumption. Today's engineers recognize that MacLeod achieved advanced energy efficiency through centuries-old knowledge rather than modern technology. The ultimate vindication of his methods came in survival statistics. During the winter of 1884 to 85, 31 lives were lost.